Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today I'm welcoming Reverend Phiwa Langeni. As a queer black trans person from an immigrant family, the Reverend Phiwa Langeni is quite skilled at detecting and decreasing various societal gaps, especially for those with multiple minoritized identities. Since ordination in 2011, Phiwa has served in just about every local church setting possible: a thriving progressive church, multi-charge rural churches, a large suburban church, small churches deeply rooted in political and social justice, and a new church start nonprofit hybrid. They currently serve as an ambassador for innovation and engagement in the United Church of Christ Center for Analytics, Research, Development, and Data. Phiwa is also the owner of a few small creative businesses, including their most recent adventures in fashion design. They solo parent an adult daughter who challenges them in brilliance and beauty. In their free time, Phiwa enjoys reading, upcycling, 90s R&B, dad jokes, and creating all manner of things. All right, welcome to the show, Reverend Phiwa Langeni. Thanks for being here. What else would you like our listeners to know about you?
I am just really geeked to be able to, engage in faith and everything. I was ruined a little bit by seminary because everything I do, everything I see in the world there are theological roots to it, So any chance I get to, be able to geek out theologically, feels like an awesomeness for me. So theological everything. And so I love good challenges. Someone's like, hey, what about this? I will find a way to make sure that we can find the theology from that as well.
Love it. Love geeking out on theology for sure on this show. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
Let's see. Talk to us about your faith story, if you can share kind of how you got introduced to the faith, what it looks like today, anything in between you want to share, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's been quite a journey. So, my family is, I was born and raised in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. And my family is from South Africa. So it was kind of like one of the mission places, of Seventh-day Adventism. So the way it showed up in my family and like in the communities around us, were pretty particular, but having been born there, and then my family moved to the US when I was a baby. And everywhere we went, right, there was like a school community, but also a Seventh-day Adventist community. So a lot of like the Christianity that had like the Seventh-day Adventism, the way that it was like presented to me at least, had elements of, having had to escape a racist South Africa with apartheid, and then being in the US as like, immigrants whose first language is not English, just all the ways, right, that we kind of encountered what a good Christian is. We were often on the receiving end of, nice church people's Christmas gifts because, it was, my parents and my, the 5 kids, family of 7 as immigrants in the US, as you would imagine, had like, a lot of need, we've seen food pantries almost always at churches, so like, that's been like a key part of the, I guess like my experience with like, just church mission as a receiving end, and all the ways in which, there was like embarrassment and, just the hoops we had to jump through to get, essential aid, that I realize now is kind of shaped, how I am as a clergy person today. But as a kid though, too, so like, being a Seventh-day Adventist also means, that, we observe the Sabbath from like Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. That means pretty much, there were no football games, no parties, there was a lot of like restrictions growing up. And so it felt kind of legalistic and oppressive to me as a kid because I wanted to do kid stuff. And there weren't many places where we could, or even like, pepperoni pizza almost everywhere you went. Like that's the standard topping, right? Couldn't engage in that either. So it was a whole bunch of that, and I had questions and they weren't necessarily always welcomed, again, like just the iteration, the kinds that was presented to me. I don't want to speak for the whole denomination, obviously. But So for me, like, the kind of like the last straw of like my being able to be there is realizing I was queer, and there just was not space for me as a queer person in the church, so I left intending to never come back to the church. And I've been like starting to tell folk, the moment when I realized explicitly that I am not a Seventh-day Adventist, I'd ordered a pepperoni pizza, and I swear it took like over an hour to get there. Like I was anxious the whole time, just kind of pacing, like, I'm going to do it. And I opened the pizza box, and I remember I was sitting on my mattress, which was on the floor, I was like a young 20 something. And I took a bite of the pizza, and I just started bawling. Like it was just, so Seventh-day Adventism, right? It's not just a belief, it's like an identity. And so my leaving the SDA church, I have language for it now looking back, right? But there was like a piece of me that I was leaving behind in that bite of pepperoni pizza. I'm pretty sure I didn't finish that pizza, it's probably too late to ask for a refund. But like just the identity that led with, then a belief system was second. So to question my beliefs was to question my identity, and was like, in some ways, to like, how dare you like not have pride in who you are if this is who you are, but I'm also queer, and these two things were not matching, So again, like it's taken like years in seminary and years since seminary to like really still kind of unpack just what that turmoil was, So I feel like I'm certainly now in a place where I'm not just rejecting Seventh-day Adventism as a whole, or like being able to like talk badly about it just because like it was a lot, and just like it was always about, obeying, elders and adults and parents, and again, like from an African tradition, it's like anybody who was older than me, and like just very close to that too is like, because if you don't, it's this one way ticket to hell, and you might not make it back, and just that constant fear of like, what if I get caught, and not, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing to do, so that's certainly, those kinds of like those fears of like, I can't do this because I'll get caught. Even transform my parenting, how I parent my daughter was very much about, I probably overshared with her and like leaned into like their consequences. You could choose to do this, and then this consequence is going to come. If you choose to do this, if you choose to lie, here's the consequence. If you, choose to whatever that may be, right? There are going to be consequences, not for the fear of these consequences, right? Because like consequence and like fear of getting caught are not the same thing, I think you probably land in a similar place, but the process emotionally, mentally, spiritually, consequences felt less detrimental to like, kind of my parenting, and also trying to like raise up a young Black woman in this world that we're in that doesn't really care much for Black women, for perfectly honest.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. I want to, this is only the introduction, so forgive me if I'm getting out of order, which I kind of warned you, I guess, about.
Sure.
I'm touched by that, and I'm thinking about, I guess I want to ask, like, you mentioned you left the church, broadly speaking, without wanting to come back, and I'm curious, like, what was it about the United Church of Christ? I'm not sure if that was your first introduction back into the church. What was that? What was it that got you back?
Yeah, that's kind of wild, So I in undergrad, the place where I ate the pizza, I was like done for a while for church, like that was it. And so I was going to school in this like small white town. It's like primarily a farming community, and I was like this like liberal arts college, like 1,200 students maybe. And a friend was like, hey, come to church with me. So I've been like kind of visiting some churches on Sundays with people here and there, but she introduced me to this church, it's like this Mexican Pentecostal church in Alma, Michigan. And my first thought was like, they got Mexicans here? Like, I didn't even know that, right? Like, where y'all at? Like, this is apparently where they are, And then like the idea that it was like a Pentecostal church, like as an SDA person, Seventh-day Adventist, that would have never happened, just like being in a Pentecostal church, And so, but there's something about being there, that like the authenticity of their worship that like kept drawing me in. Theologically, we were not at all compatible, right? Because like, even though like it was clear to me that they weren't really into the queer stuff, they were still welcoming mostly in a way that, I hadn't seen in the SDA church. So I kept sticking around, and it was like on and off again for like 2 years at that place. Again, knowing full well, like intellectually, like this is not a fit, like this wasn't going to be home, but I enjoyed the people, the music, the worship, there's something that always like kind of left me full up when I went back out into the world. Right. they had this one visiting prophet, I guess his title's a prophet, and he said the word vocation, and that spun me out. My vocation, oh my gosh, this is what I need to be doing. I don't know what else that guy said, you know what I'm saying? He could have like preached fire and brimstone, I have no idea. But like, that word, which is wild because like in Alma, we had just had like, this Lilly grant, there was like vocation was literally all over campus. So it's not even like a brand new word for me. Like, but when we came out of his mouth, I was like, this is what I need to do, So, I went back to, 4 of my 5 mentors at Alma who were, this is funny now, but like they're all like kind of had gone to seminary, some were in the religious program, some were in like sociology, others were like in a history. And so I was like, 4 or 5 of them had gone to Princeton, so they were all very affirming. And they're like, here's this, this FTE, like all the accredited schools in the US and Canada. And so I went through it one by one, just marking like, hey, some that was like very clear, theologically weren't doing it. So that Catholic, SDA, cross those off. There are others that are like, the seminarian can bring his wife. And it was very clear. I'm like, okay, cross that off, just some of the coded language. And so I did a round 2 online, where it's like, okay, of these ones that I'd selected, those hundreds or however many, I don't remember now, I went online, like, what does your website say? Getting a closer look at like, who do you really say you are? Not just in this book, it's kind of like this stiff catalog, but like, how does it look? How does it feel to be in your midst? I narrowed it down to 3 schools. One was Princeton Theological Seminary, which 4 of the 5 had gone to that school. So I felt obligated to, at least apply. I didn't get in. Then the other 2 were Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, and Chicago Theological Seminary in Chicago. And both of them are UCC schools. I'm like, UCC, what is this? I go to UCC online. I'm like, in my mind, I was for sure about to just start my own religion, Puritan, had like the sign of the P, had it all the way figured out because like, I just figured, it was going to be a place where I could land. And then here's this UCC. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, they were in the time when I found them in 2007, they were doing like this campaign, like God is still speaking. And, the whole like, never place a period where God has placed a comma. Questions are welcome. Like, I couldn't believe, if this was like in a movie, this would have been the heavens, would have been opened up and doves would have flying around my head, light would have shown up everywhere. But like, it was definitely a moment of like, what? Like, this thing exists? And I just started devouring content, and there wasn't a UCC church where I was, so that might have, been part of it, And so I ended up going to St. Louis, Eden Seminary. Like months later, I enrolled, got in, and just moved to St. Louis with my daughter. And it was like, I went to seminary looking for God, and I tell people I found myself. It was just like getting a chance to like, re-engage on these holy scriptures that I heard in a very particular way all my life, being able to like get a clearer understanding of like, a shift, I guess, a new relationship with myself in the Bible and a relationship with me and God, but that really then centered around like, well, then who am I to be able to have these relationships with Bible and God, So I really had to like unpack a whole bunch of stuff within my, within me. I got a therapist for the first time, which is like so bizarre because like, especially in like Black African families, like our business stays here, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I didn't even tell my family I was seeing a therapist for like years past before I was even able to tell them that, it was kind of terrifying, and like now I'm just like, I'm a therapy evangelist. Like anyone having a human experience, this is my little tiny plug, unshamefully. If you're having a human experience, I absolutely encourage you to go see a therapist, you know what I'm saying? Like, and just like build that into your budget as much as possible. No, it's a privilege to be able to do so, but like, not just when things are going wrong, you know what I'm saying? Like it's why I'm able to be, as an effective and I think a compassionate person and a clergy person and a parent and, a friend, all these things, is that I have like kind of built into my budget, like a solid, like someone who can like, help me be clear about me, on an ongoing basis, because it's very easy to lose yourself.
I want to touch on something you said there about finding yourself in seminary. You said earlier something about how identity and beliefs can become enmeshed. Yeah, I think that's interesting because I, at least from an outsider perspective, in the last few years, I feel like I see that in many of the folks deconstructing, at least. And I'm curious, like, what do you think? What are your thoughts there, having gone through it, and what advice, I don't know, might you have?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. One that's funny. It literally came out of my mouth, but I've never put those together side by side. So thank you for that.
Sure.
mind, it's like a mental Rubik's Cube. But yeah, truly, so it's like, yeah, I'm also a word nerd. Like, they're delicious. I love the way that they taste in my mouth, right? These words. And so I'm very mindful of like how we use language, like both in its limits, but also in the creativity with it, right? So I've been paying attention a lot more where it's like, even in the way that we speak, someone will say, I am a Christian, not my beliefs are Christian, right? So like you've already woven in, your belief systems, we've created them as identities, and so, even someone, politically, I am whatever your political alignment is, instead of my political beliefs are, and I think it probably started as a shortcut, just because like, it's like having a contraction, right? It's like a shortcut for how we speak, but I do believe, right, you say something enough times, long enough, you begin to believe it. And then all of a sudden, when I say something about your political belief or your religious belief, it's a personal attack,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's definitely value in, even, if you use that shortcut language, just be clear about who you are, that you are not your belief systems. You know what I'm saying? You're not your gender, you're not your whatever, fill in the blank identity, right? But like, it's all of those things together that kind of shape who you are in this moment. And all those things aren't going to stay the same till forever. And I'm glad that they don't, because like the identities and the beliefs that I had when I was 5, it would be a problem, at, my 40s or 50s or whatever, to still have those same beliefs, if again, I have the capacity to learn and grow. To not do so, I genuinely believe is an affront to God and creation. How dare you not live to your fullest capacity? So again, my capacity may not match yours, but whatever it is that our own capacities are, to be able to learn and grow and be fully, it is an affront to creation, So for some folk, who are like, country first or politics first or, religion first, it's personhood first, what I'm saying? Like, and I know it's a very dangerous thing to say in this culture where, we like to, it's very like me first and then I'll think about you maybe, and only if it's in the particular way that I want you to be thought of.
Yeah.
But, if we move like more to like a healthier place of, you can be a full human in your fullest humanity and I can be as well. And there are places where that'll overlap well and other places where it's like two poles of a magnet. They're just not going to be consistent, right? But like in your full humanity, as long as my full humanity does not impose on or do violence against yours, we're good, I don't have to believe everything that you believe, and the idea that anyone would, like I see this mostly like in politics and even, congregations where it's like, oh, here's what we believe. Like a room full of 10 people, there are going to be at least 30 beliefs in that room, And so we finally, again, shortcut words and language to say that we can like corporately believe, like the word faith, what does that mean? What does grace mean? What does sin mean? That means a lot of things to a lot of people, even within one community, right? A smaller community, whether it's a family or a church or whatever, denomination. So we find shortcuts, right, to like say what we are hoping to try to gather on some commonalities and, ways in which we can learn and grow with each other. But even identical twins will not have the exact same beliefs and understandings, but I think the way that we do it nowadays is like very, well, if you don't believe this, you can't be in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, but what does that even mean, really? We have all these like fancy shortcut snippet words and whatnot, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah. I really like what you said earlier there. It's if I heard it right, an affront to creation, not to grow.
Yeah.
It really speaks, I think, to that, the creator God.
Absolutely.
Well, I suppose I should get back on track here. I want to just keep going with this line. But I'm curious, maybe let me ask it in this way. I was going to ask about spiritual practices. Do you see therapy as a spiritual practice for yourself?
Yeah. So actually, theologically, so, at the very beginning, right, we hear like, God creates, God is a creator. And so we also read, right, that, we are made in God's image. So if God is a creator, perhaps with a big C, that means all of us are creators with a small c, right? Not to make ourselves of gods, right? But
right.
If God is a creating God, then we are a creating people. And so for me, creativity is at the core of all of my spiritual practices, So whether that's like creating, with my words and language, what I'm saying, like my writing, writing devotions or sermons or just journaling, right? All of that to me is like spiritual practice, as a creator like God creator, right? Sometimes that's also meant, creating space for LGBTQ folk in a city where there wasn't. That's what I did in Lansing, Michigan, founding the Sala Center. If that's, creating new possible ways forward, when a faith community is kind of stuck, like, okay, here's what we've been doing for so long and we don't know what to do next, that to me, like that creation, right? This creative energy, preferences, right? Like just the being able to, again, at least for me, this creativity is about being whole. And so if we have systems where all people can't be whole, we've got to create new ways forward, so that sometimes that's creating a disturbance in the status quo. I'm here for that, So really the core, I would say, theologically for me, like creativity is, essential. And in recent years, I used to be like, creativity, as an act of resistance. But I'm like, no, creativity for the sake of creativity. Like that to me kind of speaks to some of that Sabbath, like that I'm no longer discarding from the SDA church, but this idea of you get to create, you get to have pleasure, you get to have joy, you get to just be in your creative energy, like be this image of God, right? In this creative space and whatever, creativity that is, it's not limited to like, well, I'm not an artist. Well, you don't have to be, right? To create, in the many ways that God creates. That to me is like the core of like my practices, so therapy, I'm creating a space for me to just untangle the human experiences I've had all week with someone who is, holding a container for me to do so safely, without having to worry about, oh, I didn't say that the way I wanted to, and I don't want to accidentally hurt somebody. I could be as petty as I want to be in therapy, right? Because I know this person's not going to hold me to it till forever. Amen. So really, truly, I'd say creativity is like the core, like everything I'm about, when I'm creating, to me, I feel most connected to, to God as creator.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had another guest, I think, speak about creation being a core element of who we are as made in God's image. And I think I've noticed over the last year how much I really appreciate being able to do creative things, even though I wouldn't necessarily consider myself an artist per se.
Right.
I really enjoy it. Well, we're already 20 minutes in here and having such a great conversation. I want to save some time here for what else I think is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah.
And I'll use the phrase the E word. It's this E word that Phiwa and I both primarily find ourselves, at least for me, I'm assuming, in mainline Protestant contexts where the word evangelism can be a big, scary word. And sometimes for good reason. I hope to talk about that here. But first, I guess maybe introduce kind of what you do now within the United Church of Christ around evangelism and trying to create space. And then we can kind of talk more about what you mean by the word and how you understand it and how it can, how you help to coach communities of faith.
Yeah, definitely. So my current role is actually a brand new one at the United Church of Christ. It is, I'm the ambassador for innovation and engagement. So after you've heard me talk about creativity, it kind of makes sense that I'm like in a role where innovation is, a verb in the, to like be able to innovate, in my daily work. And then there's this thing about engagement, right? Where it's like, really trying to, how do we engage with churches, primarily those, who we don't often hear from, like, on the, conference or regional level, or even at the national level. Kind of, at least for me, the focus of, like rural churches or small churches or churches of color, or even like new church starts, like these are, they tend to all kind of be smaller, and are niche usually, so it's like, kind of started in the last, within 10, even 5, 10, 20 years. So for me, I think that's like a really key place, right? Where it's like, especially for churches that are starting now, kind of joining a denomination that's been around, at least since the 50s as United Church of Christ, and way longer before that, with the 4 denominations that merged. How do we hold, saying like these communities that are shaped around things that were not even issues back then, right? And so I love that, I'm saying? I live in the liminal spaces, everything about who I am, it's like, how do we, kind of creating bridges between, tradition and, contemporary life, how do we create possibility, right? In a way that doesn't just discard everywhere we've been, because I think that does violence. to our stories, to our tradition, to our beliefs. Excuse me. But that also doesn't stay reminiscing about what we used to be, who we used to be, how we used to function or operate, right? So I feel like a lot of my work, again, regardless of what flavor of church I'm engaging, that we really are honest, right, about, coming down to, who are we at our core? Like, why are we here? Simon Sinek, the whole start with why. It's almost always any talk that I give, I encourage people to watch that first before we engage, because it's like, if you don't even really know why you're here, in church language, what's your mission, right? What are you doing, and that's fine. Just be honest about it, right? I think, kind of doing that work, at least in my, optimistic, hopeful self, it'll help churches not, unintentionally do the whole bait and switch, yeah, all are welcome. And you get there and then there's like these microaggressions. I'm like, this actually is not very welcoming, and that unfortunately happens more often than not in my experiences, So really try to help people get honest about who they are. If you say that you're welcoming in this way, don't just tell me, show me. Could be the 10 years I spent in St. Louis, the show me state is like, okay, cool. You could tell me all day long, you know what I'm saying? And like, you have like these really articulate faith statements and beautiful, welcomes on your website. And then you get there and it's like, oh, wow. So that's not even who y'all are, right? False advertising is the thing that comes to mind, right? So that's kind of, I guess like kind of underlying my work, kind of reaching in, with folk, is just even the idea that innovation is not always like the fastest, newest, greatest, brightest, latest, tech toy or whatever, but it's just like doing what you do with intention and then doing it well. If you're a community that loves feeding the people around you, then why is your message not around that? You know what I'm saying? Like, that, and then feeding in whatever way you want to, spiritually, physically, whatever, right? So if you have a clear sense about who you are, then it makes a better sense than for like how you get to tell people who you are. And like this kind of touches into evangelism some, right? So it's like, don't be the church down the street. You know what I'm saying? Like, they may have the people you're trying to get to, but like you can't be them because you're not them.
Right.
So you're doing violence to the people who are gathering in your place. You're doing violence to, your call, and then people do show up because you've said one thing, but that's actually not who you are. And then you wonder why they left you to go to that place across the street because, well, that's who they are, right? The phrase, like the grass is greener on the other side. Well, what if I tended to the grass on my side? It too would be green.
Right. Well, I hope we can come back to these. So scratching down some notes here, we'll have to see. I feel like we've been talking so long off topic, and there's so much good stuff that we don't even have time to cover. But you said doesn't. Well, I'll hold on to it. It's been a great conversation. I'm hoping we can get back to it. But talk a little bit more about what you mean by evangelism.
Yeah. So it is an E word. It's one of those like ugly words that I would. A lot of like, maybe progressive, more kind of like liberal leaning churches kind of resist it because of how evangelism has kind of been like, co-opted by kind of like this kind of like rigid, if not this, then go to hell directly, don't pass go or collect 200 type of a stance, right? I would almost even liken it, to like the word queer in queer spaces, right? Where it's like, queer at its most base definition, right, is like that which is not like the others, and like for the longest time, there's some people even today, right, who cannot embrace queer because of the harm and the violence that was done against them because of it, or those around them who they care about. In the same way, evangelism, right, there may be some people who can never and will never embrace it because of the harm that's been done. And I will respect that, right? At the same time, there's something very much about empowering, about claiming a word that, just because some folk have like kind of like weaponized it,
Yeah.
I think sometimes by not claiming it, it actually like lets us off the hook for doing what it is inviting us to do. We're so afraid sometimes of like making a stance of like, here's what we do believe, like on the one hand, we're like, oh, we know what we don't believe, or we're not like that. We're not like that. Okay, but what are you like? What are you inviting me into? I know, okay, it's not going to be no hate from the pulpit around, these whatever. I know that it won't be about, whatever kind of violence is right that we're escaping, but what will it be about, And again, so one things we like to like, love wins all. Okay, what does that even mean? Like, what does that mean to me, as a person trying to engage in community, right? And so I think we would do well to like find ways to reclaim, even if it's not that word, how do we reclaim its essence in a very, kind of strategic and honest and authentic way? I really genuinely believe that that's what's going to help move us into whatever Church Next is going to be, is, again, starting with why. Why are you doing this, right? In the business world, marketing to do in a church context, right, is not about profit over people. How do we then take some of the, I guess the tools that are used in marketing, but then to apply it to our, values and essence, so that it's not, like kind of ends up being kind of bait and switch, or like kind of rigid, like, okay, this is actually false advertising. And that's not even allowed in the marketing world. It still happens, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, shameless plug, Phiwa. I think this will release, or it hasn't released yet. No, I can't talk this morning.
No worries.
It's a season before your season. In season 8, I have an interview with J.J. Peterson, who talks about marketing for nonprofits and churches, which I'd highly recommend for folks. It'll be out by the time this interview is out. That's what I'm trying to say.
Excellent. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned earlier in your interview, in this conversation, talking about how you're growing up in your experience with church and like food pantries and stuff like that, like hoops to jump through. And I want to ask you about the evangelism and kind of the definitely problem history of like colonialism and missions kind of being all kind of tied up together. And that's what I think about when you talk about hoops to jump through. It was like, hey, we want to share the gospel, but it's like, oh, you also have to like accept Western,
right,
that kind of thing. Like it's abandon your culture, accept Western ideology, and then you can become a Christian.
Right.
And for good reason, there's a lot of pushback now against, I think, evangelism because of that legacy, right?
Right. Proselytizing, I think is the fancier word for, it's often like coded as evangelism, but it's not evangelism, Yes, this word for me, right? The language, like words, like even just like tracking back, like the etymology, like what does this actually mean? Helps me like be able to, okay, cool. Then here's the essence of the word. How do I get to that? If I can't get to that word itself, how do I get to the essence of what it is that we're supposed to be, or supposed to be like, that we can be doing to, live out the different calls we have, communally and individually.
I think that's a helpful distinction there. I'm writing, I got full of notes here. I want to hear some good examples, maybe. I was intrigued by what you said about kind of the show me, don't tell me. Mm-hmm. At least as I heard it, because I think that can often be a thing of mainline churches. We're like, hey, we got our rainbow flag up and we got our affirming statement. And if I'm hearing you right, you're like, don't tell me, show me.
Right.
So what are some examples you could maybe think back of or give ideas for?
Yeah. So if you're a church that says, we love kids, bring them in, blah, 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 right? So a family shows up with their kids. And the kids are like, making noise in the back. They're getting fussy. And every 10 seconds, you got people swiveling in their pews to look back at you like, do you mind? Yeah. You don't love kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, or there's no actual space for people to be, in there with their kids. If you say that you're welcoming of all folk and someone who uses a wheelchair shows up and they can't even get into your sanctuary, maybe you're not welcoming to all folk. You know what I'm saying? So, these are like maybe subtle things that we kind of overlook. So it's like, what are your barriers? Who are the people you want to invite?
Yeah.
Go look in your space. Are all the pictures on your wall of white people?
Yeah.
Are they all men?
Yeah.
Are the images of families all cis heterosexual, right? Like nuclear family? Mm-hmm. Are all the books in your library, right? Is it all just like, old dead white men? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, what is the liturgy in your bulletin every Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Is it always the same people? The same flavor, those are the things, that I think, like today churches can literally, start doing like an internal audit, who are the people we're hoping to welcome? And now pretend like you're one of those people and without, pretending like no blackface basically. But, and then just look through your space. How would someone that you're trying to welcome see it? Is it actually welcoming, right? So it's like more than just, we have a rainbow flag. Yes, absolutely. If you're welcoming to LGBT folk, make it very clear, because not everybody says so, right? And also, in your clarity, are the people in your congregation actually prepared to engage with people who are LGBTQ?
Yeah.
And you're not asking me, who's the boy one? Who's the girl one? Ma'am? Like, that's not welcoming, you know? Not, you know, asking a trans person if they've had the surgery, you know? So it's like, truly, it's like, you know, being able to be prepared as a community, even before the people you're trying to welcome are here, you know? So that's usually what I'm trying to tell people is like, yes, put the message out there, but just make sure that you're not falsely advertising, because have you done the work internally to actually welcome these people? You know, a welcome is not just putting numbers in your reporting every year for, you know, denominational, you know, stats and reports or whatever, but it's who are you, you know, are you indeed changed by the people you've welcomed? Because if you're not, you know what I'm saying, like that reeks of assimilation to me. Another word, you know, as an immigrant child, assimilation, it requires erasure, you know. I have to erase a part of who I am and some of my own culture so I can fit in, you know, and I think it's very different to fit in versus belonging.
Yeah.
How do you help people belong without having to fit in? Because to fit in, again, you're having to just shave stuff off to be able to fit one shape of your community, you know?
That's a really intriguing question there. Belonging without having to fit in, kind of squeezing into.
Absolutely.
What, round hole, square peg, round hole kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's something else I want to ask you, but I've already forgotten, and there's still good questions.
No worries.
I want to hear your perspectives on. So when I think about, and I kind of heard this from another conversation I was fortunate to be a part of with you, kind of about storytelling as a key part of evangelism. Maybe talk just unpack that a little bit, and then I also want to hear like how you think we might need to reshape our worship experiences to better include storytelling in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as Christians, you know, Christ followers, Jesus was always using story. I mean, parables, right? Like, stories are so powerful because they're the things that become memorable, right? So, you know, I can't tell you what verse or scripture or whatever things have been found, but I can tell you, here's a story and it stuck with me, right? Because, you know, again, a parable, the brilliance of it, it's short, it's memorable, and it almost always has like a twist ending, you know, that I think, you know, in a modern context, we sometimes lose, you know, the kind of gut-wrenching twist at the end of the story. We're like, wait, what? You expect the story to go a certain way, and then all of a sudden it takes a turn, and that stays with you, right? It like teases you into like new action and new, you know, being, right? So that's the power of story, you know. However, it can be done in a very exploitative way, you know.
Yeah.
Think the missionaries going to like poor Africa and the little kids with distended bellies and flies flying everywhere. When I moved back to South Africa as a 10-year-old, I was surprised at how many flies there weren't.
Huh.
You know, I found out in the last few years, and I haven't like fact checked it because I can't stomach myself to do it. Someone had told me some of these people, white missionary types, would literally put honey on these kids' heads so that flies could fly around their heads.
Wow.
Now that kind of storytelling is not okay, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, this whole like kind of capitalizing or exploiting someone's pain and like needing them to stay in their pain so that you can have relevance.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to, man, I went to South Africa or wherever, right? And I was gut-wrenched to see the kind of poverty there. Tell the story about what happened to you.
Yeah.
Me, right? Here's how what I saw, without giving the details of what happened to them, let me tell you what happened to me. That to me has got like a lot more power and possibility. So you're not pimping out other people's stories for your own personal gain or, you know, communal gain or whatever fill in the blank gain, because it's not them, you know. But talk about how you were transformed. Yo, I really thought this is what I believed, and then I saw this. I couldn't hold the two together, you know. Like even like doing LGBTQ welcoming, right? Because it's like a lot of the times, you know, a lot of the work that I do is like people are like, well, can you come talk about your story? I'm like, I'd rather you talk about your story.
Yeah.
How did you go from man and woman only to, wow, absolutely, you're right. Talk about your story, because that is where most people are. Quit pimping out my pain.
Yeah.
Because then y'all leave and you keep telling my story to other people, but like not with, you know, you feel like you've done something by sharing my story.
Yeah.
Now share your story, because now you stay in it, you're in that work. And even as you keep changing, your story's going to change with you. Because if you keep telling my story, I'm not even there anymore, but people are still telling this one snapshot of a story that I told you for a specific purpose, right? So now you just keep, trying to like squeeze out whatever benefits from my one story, as opposed to your own transformation. And now you can track that as you go and grow, And to me, that kind of storytelling is so much more powerful, right? In this context,
Yeah.
And, even just like this idea, Jesus kind of calling the 12 that we're told about, at least, evangelism, right? It's not about come and see, which by the way is like kind of a marketing, like Nike's Just Do It, Jesus is come and see.
Yeah.
When they're like, hey, what are you talking about? Come and see, I could tell you, but I'd rather show you. And then what does Jesus show, right? He's not showing, and look how many members I got. Look how many followers I got. Look how many whatever. Jesus shows them, here's how you feed. Not, look how many people I fed.
Yep.
Here's how you teach. Oh, look at what I was able to tell people. Here's how you heal, right? And I think that is why I keep asking our churches, why are you here? One question I love, using that, now at least I'm in a context where I can share it without feeling like I might get run out, is if your community just disappeared magically today.
Yeah. Yeah.
How would anyone in the city, town, wherever you are, how would they be affected?
Yep.
And the uncomfortable reality is for a lot of us, they wouldn't be.
Right.
They might not even notice, right? And so then the question is, then how do we get reconnected, with people in our communities? And the second question to that is, there's some people who are now in the community, right, doing some stuff, but are you expecting something back? Because I've also heard like, oh, but we were doing this for 3 months and no one has showed up on Sunday.
Yeah.
Then you're not in it for the right reason. You know what I'm saying? If your purpose is more butts and pews, bro, guess what? Then you're not, and that's probably why, But if you're in it because it's the right thing to do, it doesn't matter whether or not someone shows up in your pews. You know what I'm saying? The reward is I'm in alignment with my assignment from God.
Yeah.
If that's not what you're in it for, I'm begging, for that alignment to reoccur. Because I think that is what makes the church kind of irrelevant in some ways. It's not because butts are not showing up in our, sitting in our pews, not because, tithes aren't being paid in envelopes monthly, whatever else. I mean, those are important too. But I would say the most important thing, it's not go ye therefore and maintain your buildings.
Yep.
Right. So it's like, truly, how are you actually being, responding to the cries of God's people where you are within your spheres of influence, and with our technologies now, I mean, we're not even in the same place right now. So we're able to have these conversations that, again, hopefully will land into the headphones and ears of people who can realign and, do the things that they're called to do. Like, what is your call? I can't tell you what that is. I can tell you what my wrestling with my own call is, as a person, as a, community or an organization or fill in the blank. Right. But each of us are the only ones who can actually answer that. Right. And so anyone who's going to show up and be like, oh, here are the things you need to do to whatever, I'm already suspicious,
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I like you kind of mentioned about the folks earlier. You mentioned about like the bait and switch in marketing, and that's people can see through that just like they can see through
Absolutely.
if you're just doing a church program to get them to show up on Sunday morning.
Right.
Yeah. So I grew up Baptist, independent Baptist, where testimony wasn't a huge part, but it was a fairly regular thing to have like a testimony service or something. And certainly there can be the opportunity for it to be performative, perhaps.
Right.
I think I'm a big believer in storytelling and sharing, like you said, telling your story. I'm curious, like, so much we're going through this COVID time, which is still dragging on. It'll still be dragging on, most likely, even when this interview releases. I'm hoping something substantial comes. We use this opportunity as an opportunity to substantially change our Sunday worship experiences, or whenever we gather corporately.
Right.
How do you think we could adjust perhaps for like the average Sunday morning 10:30 church to better incorporate like storytelling as part of that corporate experience?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many ways. I think being able to, when you tell a story, right? If I've told you some stories that I'm telling in a particular way because we're being recorded, right? If you and I were having the same story after hours, having a beverage of our choosing, it would be the same story, but my delivery is going to be very different, right? Because I'm going to be a lot more animated about it. I might even act out some of the stuff. I might have some like colorful words to include in it, right? I will likely have colorful words to include in it. It's the same story, but the telling is different. And I think some of the ways in which we can really get clear about, how does it we do our storytelling, right? So it's not just how do we tell stories for people in our pews, right? Because I think often what we do is we use all these like coded, Christian words, like, what does that mean to someone who's never been in your community, right? Because even how you use that word, even from one Christian church to another,
Yep.
It isn't used in the same way.
Yep.
So shift your delivery, right? But if your story is shifting based on who you're telling, then that's some internal work y'all got to do, right? So it's not about tell a different story.
Mm-hmm.
It's how is your delivery being shared so that it can reach the people you're trying to reach, People already in your pews already know what you're about, right? So if you want other people to know the goodness that you've got, what do you need to do to share it? Again, not so that they can show up, but so that they can actually get the good news that you want to share.
Yeah.
Jesus' invitations were not about, like, hey, you can follow me. Here's what that means, though. And some people couldn't. And they turned away. It wasn't like, no, I said, like choose you this day. You don't have to do it in a particular way. So I think how it is that we are sharing our stories, means that, the story essentially is like, what is your why? Why are y'all here? Why does it matter? One community I was sharing with, asking that question, I was actually moved by like that question actually induced tears from folks. They're like, I don't know what I would do without this place. I was like, oh, okay. Then I'm like, what is it then about that? What is that threat? Like that tears that got brought on, like, why? That's your why right there, And then they started realizing, it's because we get to support each other, whatever that is, right? So it's not just like, we just like hanging out.
Right.
Which, that's valid, but be clear in your evangelism or marketing that, hey, we just like hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't say you're this though, because it's not who you are, right? And I think truly, it's not like, again, to try to judge people like, oh, this, that, or whatever else, but just be honest. And it's your authenticity, because there are a lot more people who are able to, detect a lack of authenticity. And that's just like, that's untasty, whoever you may be, right? So it's like just being clear and true to who you are. And then tell stories. And that might mean, let's hear from the octogenarian what it is about this faith community that they love. Let's hear from our 8-year-old, our 18-year-old, And again, so it's not just, here's a script that you got to do, and let them tell it in their own language. If somebody drops a few, colorful languages in there, it's not about, oh, you can't say that in here. Why not? You think God doesn't hear that and isn't also still in them and caring enough? Like, so it's like, what are those things that are becoming barriers for us to be able to encounter one another, And so like, kind of like this, a pious approach to church and theology and etc., right, is a huge turnoff to people, because life is way messier than that. Life is, messier than your pristine windows and freshly carpeted sanctuaries, so you can't bring in the coffee in here. Like, life is messier than that, And to me, that says you value your space more than you value the messiness that I bring into here, seeking wholeness.
Yeah.
So I'm so messy, I don't feel like I can come into your space because it's a bit too sterile.
Yeah.
And that's backwards, I've heard some people say, it's like you injure yourself, but you don't go to the hospital until you're a little bit more healed.
Yeah.
If I am a spiritual mess, I need to show up to this place of spiritual wholeness, at least in the way we advertise it. Like, I'm not supposed to get myself right and then show up to church. That's backwards. Like, and that unfortunately is what I hear more of, is, oh no, I got to get right. So what that you went to the club the night before and you come to church on a Sunday? Shouldn't be shamed for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, maybe we're not the church that we think we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
you said before, it's not go ye therefore and maintain your building.
Right. or your traditions, or your, fill in the blank, whatever that may be,
Yep. Well, this is a great conversation, and I feel like we could go on forever, but let's take a break, and we'll come back
Sure.
with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Phiwa Langeni, and this is I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I wish we could keep going, but I got a chiropractor here later on today that I need to go to.
Yes.
But thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your perspectives. You can take these closing questions as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what does that look like? What do you want to do? That kind of thing.
If I were to say yes, by some bizarre magic moment, I would not even last for a day. I'm gonna put it that way. I would just show up and be like, look, y'all, people, you need a savior. You already have one, and it's not me. And that's just kind of like my own posture, even like in not Pope specific churches, right? Where it's like,
sure,
this whole putting our clergy on a pedestal is a setup, So I tell people from jump, look, I'm a human. I mess up with the rest of y'all, and I often preach about my mistakes, So I don't preach what I don't practice, and I don't practice what I don't preach, what I'm saying, or practice what I preach, So it's like really truly like I'm not gonna invite the people into doing something that I'm not willing to do myself. I will invite them into my own struggles, because that to me feels more real, and it humanizes, this office, this role of pastor. So I wouldn't even last a day as a pope. And for people who need it, by all means, you know what I'm saying. But it would be the fastest pope inauguration. Like it would, yeah.
That's fine. A lot of folks just want to come in and just say they would just disavow, get rid of the papacy. Can't talk today. That works. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life.
Yo, real talk. I would bring Jesus back just so I could tattle. I want to snitch. I'm like, Jesus, look at your people. Like, but no, maybe more seriously, like I struggle with this question. But off the top of my head, there's this theologian, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who I actually probably don't even know the bulk of his works, but there's this one phrase, God consciousness, that he talks about, how all of us, have God consciousness, and that Jesus was like the most God conscious person, human, than any of the humans, I guess, that have been. And so I would want to explore that some more, like this idea of like God consciousness, right? So it's not that, so he's got like a very like, human Jesus in his theology, and, I find that I lean more toward that as well. That Jesus is not like a superhero, like Superman type of a different, materials than we are.
Right.
But that, this human Jesus, having this high God consciousness means that, I can strive, I can actually attain, more God consciousness in a way that, God, if Jesus was like Superman, like I'm not made up of the same materials, So yeah, I'd probably explore God consciousness with Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Yeah, that brings back some good memories for me from seminary.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's actually, the 1 week that we study his work it really stuck with me.
Yeah. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Ooh. I feel like this moment, one hopeful thing is that, all these structures that are being disrupted and dismantled, while I know for some it feels personal, because like the isms have been woven into who they are in a way that to dismantle them feels like they're being dismantled. But I feel as though just like the courageous, the risk taking, speaking out against power, some of it facilitated by technology, like Twitter, for example. We've never had this kind of access before ever in our history, to be able to like speak truth to power. It's really kind of like sparking a different way forward, I think probably, related to, just my posture in general, but even like this whole thing about a pope, right, is moving us to a more like kind of horizontal society.
Yep.
And less kind of like, vertical, like power over, that's a very kind of like white supremacy, colonialized type of thinking.
Yep.
But rather like a, more like feminine energy, you know what I'm saying? Like truly, I can't be free until you're free type of a posture. I feel like I'm seeing elements of that starting to be brought in a very tangible and noticeable way now. So that feels like, I feel like right now we're living this historical moment where things are switching from what was to what will be.
Good. Yeah. I hope so anyway. What else do you hope for the future of Christianity?
My hope is that we will be open enough to whatever is going to be next. And that may be not denominations. It may be not our church buildings. It may be any number of stuff, right? But that whatever is going to be next, you know what I'm saying? Like that we can stay true to Jesus's mission and not the missions of our individual denominations, organizations, and et cetera. You know, I'm super loyal to the UCC, but I'm a lot more loyal to the work to which God has called me, you know? So for right now, you know what I'm saying? Like this is the place where I can live out that call. But there may come a time, you know what I'm saying? Like if the UCC is like, no, we got to be UCC. That might be my, you know, that's the only exit I'm really kind of seeing for myself is like the work is here. It's not here, you know? Again, it's not like, you know, picking on the UCC, just any, you know, organization, right? You know, church, people, group, whatever. My hope is that we can just be open to wherever the Spirit may send us, you know, because that kind of structure and organization was relevant and meaningful in the times that they were set up. And as you were saying just now, you know, like whatever our world is being kind of like nudged toward, those same structures have to look different, you know. I think those who resist the different look will be the ones that kind of like break and fall away sooner than not.
Yeah, no, I hear you because I'm ordained in the Disciples of Christ, kind of our kind of sister denomination, and I say the same thing. Like I'm married, like my call is to the church, like Big C Church.
Yes.
First and foremost.
Yes.
And I don't mean to diss on like you denomination,
right?
But that's who my calling is to. So right. Yeah, I hear you there. Well, where can people find out more about you and connect with you if they'd like to?
Yeah. So I'm in the process of, you know, like redoing my website, and I feel like that's a constant thing that I say.
Yeah.
But revlangeni.com. So REVLANGENI.com is where I will be putting all of my content.
Are you on the socials? You can find me from there.
I am, but I'm not.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but it's Rev Langeni on the different socials as well, like Instagram, and probably have a Twitter. But yeah, revlangeni.com is probably like the place that'll, you know, at least for now, will have like the most up to date and like active participation. Yeah, more than Insta and Twitter.
Well, thanks so much for this conversation. Really appreciate your time. And I'll leave you with a word of peace. May God's peace be with you.
Thank you. Also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romick-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.